A word from our sponsors. Today's marketing leaders need more than dashboards. They need answers. That's why Zeta built Zeta Answers. It replaces guesswork with strategic control so you know where to spend and how to grow. It gives you customer foresight using predictive AI to target intent before it happens. It delivers full funnel clarity, tying media to real outcomes, online and off. It puts on demand intelligence in your team's hand, no dev tickets, no delays. And with live campaign insights, you can optimize while campaigns are still flying. Zeta Answers doesn't just measure outcomes, it drives them. See it in action at zetacmo.ai/answers. Again, that's zetacmo.ai/answers.
Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. This is Ari Paparo. I hope everyone's having a good July 4th. Last week, we just did the news, so we didn't have a guest. And now this week, we're just having a guest and not doing the news. So we're trying to mix it all up. It's been a slow news week because of July 4th, obviously. And Eric Franchi's off with his family, so it's just me. So this week, I'm pretty excited because we have Justin Evans, who probably most listeners of this podcast have run into or worked with or know. Justin is an expert in everything about data. I crossed paths with him at Nielsen. He was also at Collective, the ad network, Comcast Spotlight. Him and I have a habit of working at the same company at slightly different times. He's currently the head of innovation and insights at Samsung Ads. But the reason we're having here has nothing to do with any of that. It is because he has a new book out. It's called The Little Book of Data. And it's about, as he says, it's not about number crunching. It's about ideas. So we want to hear about this new book, The Little Book of Data, how it's relevant to our lives, what it has to do with ad tech, if anything, and just generally catch up with Justin. So I'm pretty excited to have him here. On the data theme next week, we're going to bring back our normal sort of programming format, and we have Chris Fio of Experian. So we'll hear his take on data. And the whole thing is pretty ironic because I just said last week to someone, I'm not sure who, that I hated having data people on this podcast because they tend to not say anything. So I'll also ask Justin about that. Without further ado, let's bring on Justin Evans, the author of The Little Book of Data. Justin, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. You doing anything fun for the 4th?
I am doing everything I can to keep my dog from losing his mind in all the fireworks.
Dog's least favorite holiday. While I have you, what do you think dog's favorite holiday is? Halloween?
I think it's Thanksgiving. It's a day of roasted meats. In fact, that's what I think they call it among themselves.
The day of roasted meats, it's coming up. We don't know why, but Grandma will be here and we might get some turkey. I appreciate that. That's my favorite holiday too. So what made you want to do this? Well, I mean, I'm the worst person to ask this, but it's crazy to write a book. I just wrote a book. So why'd you write a book?
I started to have this moment when I was at Comcast when I saw this very traditional business pivot and become a data-centric, digital-centric business. And I really saw a lot of change in the personnel in the company based on how well people understood data, felt comfortable with data, felt that they could integrate data into the way they worked. And some of that was perfectly appropriate, like people were not changing with the times, but some of it was actually kind of a bummer. There were people who were fantastic professionals, great leaders who just didn't seem to be able to stomach the change. And then I saw that echoed a little bit in my personal life around New York City, where, not all my friends are ad tech people. They're therapists, they're screenwriters, they are nonprofit leaders, and so on. And I saw the same sort of split where some people were comfortable with data and AI, and some people were not. And it seemed to have this kind of dividing effect on people's career tenure.
Sure.
So that was kind of the impetus for me starting to take notes and say, well, how could I talk to myself 20 years ago when I was just starting the business and express what the kind of core ideas of data are? And by the way, are their core ideas of data? And I started to make notes and started to try and really, really distill what those ideas were. And then I wanted to do an extra thing with it, which is early drafts that were kind of dry and explanatory, I thought would be elegantly simple. It turns out they weren't. And then I took the pivot to try and make the book kind of like the Freakonomics for data. And so I found stories that would illustrate the core concepts that I was sketching down. And that had another benefit to me. And you mentioned ad tech a couple of times, which is to get my head out of ad tech. I love ad tech. It's been a wonderful career, and it continues to be dynamic and change. But at the same time, I wanted to kind of try to see how well these data concepts that we've learned in ad tech play outside of ad tech in the world of medicine and health and other areas. And that was part of the fun, that I got to interview these experts from other areas of endeavor to illustrate ideas that I've crystallized from my 20-year career in ad tech and data.
That's awesome that you were able to apply learnings from ad tech outside of it, because I'm still trying to convince my therapist to track his clicks better, but unsuccessfully. Tell me, so you mentioned there's these core learnings or core principles. Walk us through a couple of those.
Yeah, so the four that are arguably the funnest in the book are the 4 data superpowers. And I really tried to distill what data does for us that we care about. And I came away thinking that they were like Prometheus and fire or electricity in the 20th century. It really was this foundational gift to our species. One of the superpowers is data gives us the power of omniscience. It allows us to, in effect, see and know things from far-flung parts of our existence. The ad tech example would be you have a client who is a retailer and they're getting sales data potentially attached to an ID and a loyalty card number from every single chain in their store. And that's something that we're accustomed to. But when you think about it, and maybe you think about it in terms of, say, climate science, where you have 185,000 weather stations around the globe that are contributing data that allows us to solve a big problem, or at least address a big problem like climate change, you really put it in perspective that this data capability becomes a superpower for the species.
I was actually just thinking about this. I was on a ferry, a cross-island ferry just yesterday, and we went right by a lighthouse. And obviously lighthouses are antiquated, but they're antiquated because there's more information. You don't just have to use your eyes to know what the information is. And that seems very analogous to what you're saying.
Yeah. And the other sections of the book deal with just the core use cases like counting and matching and scoring. And so it was fun to go back into my own professional history. Like at Nielsen, of course, was obvious for me to go into the counting concept and to set up some juxtapositions for some of the other ones. Like for matching, I talked to a biotech executive who had found, or to help to find, the linkages between genomics and cancer. And what was happening around the time she was doing her work was, and by the way, some of these stories had emotional components, like this biotech executive. Her younger sister had died of cancer in an untimely fashion. She wasn't even a smoker. She was like a singer, and she went to nightclubs, secondhand smoke, gave her cancer, and she died. And it was a tragedy for my friend. And I talked to her about her work in cancer and genomics, and they really made a big breakthrough because in those days, everybody treated all lung cancers like they were lung cancers. And what the breakthrough was during this period in the teens was cancers are not organ cancers, they are genomic cancers. So when there is a genetic modification, or there's a genetic mutation, it will drive a certain level of cancers, and it kind of goes horizontally if you were to think about it. Like, so you have the organs vertically and the genomic mutations going horizontally, and it was much more predictive of what would be a powerful treatment for these cancers. And so what my friend had done was basically set up this A equals B equals C transitive property of matching a database between the genetic mutation, the cancer, and then the treatment that treated that particular genetic mutation. And I'm like, my gosh, this is just like appending data to a customer database. And so the kind of riff in that chapter is basically how is direct marketing like curing cancer.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
So I want to delve into the psychology aspects, but also the skills aspects, because I think what you said about your experience at Comcast was interesting. You were in the Spotlight division, which is the historically the area that sells to local advertisers, and the old version of that, the pre-internet version of that, was amazingly simple. You're basically just selling TV spots. And then that division had to transform to being data-driven because people are watching less TV. Was it that some people are quantitative and some people are not, and that just is some immutable part of who they are? Or can they learn? Are there other skills? Is it just a willingness to adapt? What did you find in your experience at Comcast, but also your research elsewhere?
The purpose of the book is to tell enough of these stories about how people think about data that when you read 20 of them back to back, hopefully it should sink in. Just like reading 20 Sherlock Holmes stories, you begin to think like a detective. And I really do think these handful of ideas that drive using data are common. So I don't think it's a quantitative mindset that's required. In fact, that's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. You don't need a computer science degree or a math degree or a stats degree to be able to understand data. You just need to understand these core ideas about how to manipulate it. So the focus should come on confidence in thinking that you can address data, an imperative that everybody who uses data as an expert or a non-expert speaks English about it, or at least speaks business about it, because it should not be a jargon-driven, acronym-driven, vendor-driven, product-driven approach. It should be about business. And then the last thing is a respect for business knowledge and domain knowledge. I was an English major undergrad, and I actually think that's been a kind of a weird driver of my own career success to the extent that I have it, because I've been the person who's explained to the client in the market what data does. And the client should always demand that they be spoken to in English, and also recognize that they know their business even if they don't know data, and the business drives the use case.
Yeah. So how does that kind of common sense business knowledge help with the data analysis? Is that part of the whole package?
Yeah, one of the stories I tell in the book is the experience I had at Nielsen when we were taken over by private equity. Were you ahead before that time, Ari?
Oh, God, I blacked it all out.
It was like 05, 06?
Yeah, no, I was after that time.
You were after that. So I had these experiences where, the private equity guys would come into the boardroom, and they ran real deep. It was like Carlyle and Tommy Lee and KKR and Blackstone, all of them. And they had like 100 bankers in the room. And on the other side of the table, they would have a Nielsen data expert. And everybody in Nielsen knew what happens when private equity takes over your company. You have a sort of 40% chance of getting fired. And so these guys were sitting there across the table and trying to dance and trying to dazzle the bankers who knew nothing about data, until the bankers kind of gave up and said, okay, no one can understand this business but this executive, and therefore he gets to keep his job. But the bankers were having none of it. And so the bankers sat there and said, okay, tell me about your product. And they're like, oh, you couldn't possibly understand. It has 100 data sources and 100 different algorithms in it. And they're like, great, well, let's start with the first one. And they just sat there and bashed through all 100 data sources, all 100 algorithms, until it was all out there on the table, all the equipment. And it just was the lesson to me with everything can be picked apart and everything can be understood by even the non-expert.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. I definitely think that the most important trait in a private equity person is stubbornness and patience, from my experience as well. But that's a different story. So how do you compare the data challenges in ad tech to those in other sectors like biology? I've often thought that ad tech might be the hardest domain out there because of the amount of data, the flexibility, the messiness, and the need to respond in speed. What do you think of that assertion?
My inspiration for having confidence that what we learned in marketing and advertising applies to other domains was actually watching the career of Travis May, who, he was the CEO of LiveRamp as a very young man and pivoted and founded a company called Datavant, which is in effect LiveRamp for medicine. They would tokenize and anonymize medical data, even at the patient level, coming in massive quantities, and allow players in the healthcare space to really kind of like run really massive experiments on anonymized data. And it helped those companies skip over steps where they had to do elaborate clinical trials in order to find a cure for a disease. They would actually be able to test it on historical data because they would find people with the condition and see what if a certain kind of natural experiment was taking place, whether their outcomes statistically were more positive. And I found that a really inspirational example. And I guess I didn't quite do like a one-to-one analysis between biotech and ad tech or public health and ad tech. But what I did find is that the language between the woman who is the head epidemiologist at the Bureau of Communicable Diseases and someone from ad tech made sense, and we could speak to each other. The entrepreneur who created a loneliness score based on his own father's untimely demise and trying to help other seniors in senior centers by scoring how lonely they are. Like there was a language there. So I came away with a lot of confidence that these data concepts are completely universal, and that I agree with you. I think we might be kind of in the overtraining sector. I think what we're learning is very fast, very big, and very applicable to these other areas.
If there was one thing that the ad tech listeners of this podcast could take away, what would it be?
I think that we all have an opportunity to step back from the real nitty-gritty minutia of what we do and have an opportunity to think more innovatively about how we can be helping the marketer. I think that as we step away from data and think about use cases, I think there are ways for us to answer virtually any question a marketer has, especially now with AI tools. And so, ironically, as a data person, I think that we should think less like data people and think more like business people and focus on business problems.
Fascinating. So when I was researching this episode, I was on Amazon and I clicked on your author link. And surprisingly, this is not your first book. And it is your first data book, but there were two other books from your past. So how long have you been an author, and what was the tell us about your previous works?
I really have always desperately wanted to be a novelist, and when I got out of school, I thought the path to fame and fortune was going to be a spy novelist, and it didn't occur to me that not knowing a single thing about the world of intelligence would be a problem. So after a few rejections, I looked for a way to write suspense fiction that would play to something I knew, or at least I knew relatively as much as anybody else. So I looked to my Southern heritage and the crazy Gothic stories that my father, as a Georgia native, told me in my Virginia native small hometown. And I wrote a couple of kind of Gothic suspense novels. One is about demon possession and another is about a ghost.
It would be quite a coup if you can write a thriller, a data thriller, because we know there are legal thrillers and intelligence thrillers and military thrillers. But if you could get a guy sitting in front of Big Table to solve some world problems, I would take my hat off for you.
All right. Well, a challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. I mean, obviously, big data would be a pretty easy name for the book. There's probably a million puns you could use for the name of the book, but I'll look forward to it. So thank you so much for being here. So Justin Evans, the author of The Little Book of Data, and this is available now, right? You could go on Amazon right now and buy it.
You sure can. It's available in hardcover and in audiobook, where you can hear me sweat through 2 days of reading my own book, which is actually good fun.
Well, okay, I'm not going to let you go yet. I have one follow-up question because I have a book coming out. If those have been living under a rock, my book Yield is coming out on August 5th. I found the audiobook recording to be one of the most difficult things I've done in years. How did you do?
I had a great time. It was incredibly hard. By the end of the 2 days, you just want to have a martini IV. But it was fun for me because I was a big Harry Potter fan. I read the Harry Potter books to both my kids. And so I've been twice through them, once for myself. And that was the studio where Jim Dale read the Harry Potter books. So I had this thrill of being in the same studio that my favorite audiobook recording of all time had been recorded in.
Oh, wow. Mine was spread out over like 2 or 3 weeks. So it was really grueling, 2 hours at a time. I couldn't possibly have done it in 2 full days. I would have lost my mind.
I did lose my mind. Yes, you would.
But nevertheless, it's an audiobook. You can download it anywhere you download audiobooks. So again, Justin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture Podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.